listening to the PR Wind Down podcast, the show for public relations professionals who are ready to see real change in the PR industry. We are your hosts, April White and Laura Schooler. Let's get ready to wind down.
Let's jump into what not to do from PR pros who know. So this week's don't assume your senior level supervisor is keeping track of every detail in every account so that you don't have to.
Right. So, I mean, I'll have to admit that maybe when I was younger and my head was somewhere else, I was maybe a little bit lazy and hoping that, my bosses or supervisors would do something so that I didn't have to. Maybe once in a while that happened. But now that I am that overseer Obi-Wan Kenobi, I do see that a lot of junior people, and I'm going to say a lot, they don't really take the bull by the horns often. With if you invite them to a new client meeting, if you have them sit in on something, they're sort of like, okay, cool. And then you're like, so whatever happened to that? And they're like, what? Actually, you should be coming to me saying, well, here is what I did with this, or what do you think if we, or something, come. Right. So this is why, in my opinion, there's this disconnect and malcommunication between senior and more junior people in an agency type setting. And its expectations are not clearly set out ahead of time. And I think that the junior people think that the older, more senior people magically know everything, which is cute. But we don't. I know a lot just because of experience, but I don't know every nuance of every company or client. So it's really the junior level people's role to build the foundation of an account and bring issues to the senior people and to get the agenda set and to do the recap and to make sure the pitch is, ready for review, or the media list is built, or, oh, we're missing this, or here's what we have to do next, and keep the thing rolling. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times the more junior people, let's just say, are on 4 or 5 accounts, while the more senior people are flying over 11 or 12. The reason I just went on this there's a very long explanation, is that what you said, junior people can't assume that the senior level supervisor or the bosses knows every detail of every client. And I really do think a lot of it is just because they think oh, well, they're old, so they know everything.
Well, right. And I think it kind of goes back to hierarchy. I'm feeling oh, well, they're seniors, so they're in charge, mm-hmm. Which is true. But what's not true is that the more in charge you are, the less you can hold details in your mind. Yeah. Because you're overseeing more things. And I think when you're junior, I certainly didn't realize that when I was younger, and would never have thought, oh, it's my responsibility to take the ball and run this account. Yeah. And, but I often did because of my sort of personality type, where I just mm-hmm. kind of can't let things fall by the wayside. And I, even as a young girl in high school and things, if we had group projects, I always ended up doing the whole thing myself.
You're that kid.
I'm definitely that kid. So that personality type fares well and tends to be okay in these scenarios. But that's, but I certainly still I don't even think when I was doing it, I thought it was my job. I think I thought I was doing someone else's job that they should have been doing, and I was picking up the pieces. But in actuality, it was that was my job, right, to do that. And I shouldn't have gotten, patted on the back for that.
Oh, you're so wonderful, April, for doing the job that we pay you for.
Right, exactly. I'm sure that's what I thought.
But I think that all of what we're talking about, it's just sort of a dysfunction of the work environment, no matter what industry you're in. And especially in PR, though, because I don't feel that there's a lot of mentoring or job training. You just get thrown in the deep end of the pool. Mm-hmm. So the senior people really have to be mindful of figuring out how to motivate people and encourage people and bring them along. And sometimes things don't work out. And so somebody gets let go or somebody quits, and, worse things by far have happened. That's just the way of the world. But I definitely think that there needs to be a better camaraderie and energy among the workers at all levels to sort of encourage somebody to take more initiative and want to be engaged. And I guess that's a great mystery of career life, really.
Right. How do you motivate somebody to want to do that?
Right. And, some people are motivated by money and some people are motivated by a day off, and you just don't know. I would have liked somebody to sit down and discuss with me everything that, needed to be done going forward. And I could kind of take that. And once I have that and discuss it, then I can go and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, would be something else. And it's funny, I don't even know what else, because that's how much I am like that I can't even imagine doing it another way. But I know there's all different ways.
What would anyone else care about?
My way or the highway. But I do think, again, it is a failing on both ends. And so everybody has to be more proactive so that you can close the gap, so that there is not a lack of, no balls are dropped, no plates crash to the floor.
Right. We actually also just started doing these surveys and asking people what motivates them and what they want to work on and what would be the best way for them to achieve those things. But it's really, really challenging if you've been at a traditional setting and you've decided, okay, I'm going to start things, I'm going to do it my own way. You've already been colored by those experiences and you've already learned how to do things from those experiences. So how do you take the best of that structure without just recreating it all over again?
Because you do realize there are certain things that seem so corporate-y and annoying, but that you really have to do if you're going to run a real business, like timesheets, keeping track of time. You can't be profitable if you have no idea how many hours are being spent and where your money's going. You have to do it. It's a pain in the neck, but it has to be done. It has to be integrated into, the bigger picture of your finances. Otherwise, you will lose, or you just won't have a hand. You can't run a business like that. Right. You can't grow.
Or you need a system. I think the system we have at the moment is enough to protect against that kind of over servicing and then getting in the, in a place where you're in trouble.
But also a company like that you have, where so many people are freelance, the preponderance, to keep track of that. And to make sure that the people who work for you understand that you've assigned them a number of hours, not just because you threw a dart at the dartboard, because it's actually mapping back to your financial, your P&L or whatever. Yeah. And that they need to let you know if they're creeping up on their max number of hours and it's, there's 2 weeks left of the month or whatever, they need to let you know, so that you can decide that either you have enough, you can, rob Peter to pay Paul from one account to the other, or you had been conservative and that they can actually spend another 5-10 hours, whatever. Or you might say to them, you need to stop and we need to wait until next month.
Right.
And see, all this is just bleh, so many people are oh, it's the worst, but you have to do it.
Well, it's a way to make sure that it's a sustainable agency. Otherwise, sustainable model.
Yeah, otherwise, why are you in business?
Right. Today we're joined by Heather Delaney. She's the managing director at Gallium Ventures, and she has clients all over the globe. She's here to talk to us about the differences in doing PR in different countries, and especially how just because you have a program that works in the US, it doesn't necessarily mean it's directly relatable to the UK or vice versa. So I would love to hear, I can't wait to hear about this, because I know you have a lot of experience as a San Francisco native.
Yeah.
Now over in the UK.
Yeah, God, it's the truth. The amount of companies that I know, especially, and it's you know, as an American, we're very, very guilty of it. We often come into a new country, a big American company, and think, you know what, it's worked in the States, it's going to work just like that in Germany and in the UK and in Australia and in Hong Kong. And it's just not true.
It's interesting. I tell people I've worked for global companies and overseen like Europe and Asia, South America, but we always have people and agencies on the ground there because the nuances and the way it works and everything is totally different in different regions of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think it's anything from, you know, the imagery that's used, the messaging, the tone of voice, the subject matter, the creative campaigns. It can be completely different from one country to the next.
So how does it translate then in PR? What pieces can you take and which pieces can't you, and what are the variables that make that true or not true?
Well, I think there's a few things to unpack. I think often, you know, companies in the States move over to other countries and they assume that everything works. And yes, maybe a press release is fine. It does need to be adapted because, unlike popular belief, not everybody uses US dollars. Some people use pounds or euros. So I think that's kind of issue number one. And I think another really, really interesting point that a lot of people forget is not everybody gets excited about having a massive Silicon Valley company, you know, coming into the UK or coming into these other countries. I mean, if you look at anybody in the EU and really any country around the world, they're excited about their own local homegrown talent. They don't want a big Amazon coming in and taking over the market, and suddenly bookstores are closing.
Right.
So it's, you know, that David versus Goliath story works really well, but when you're Goliath, again, that angle has to change, and you have to really seriously consider what the locals are interested in.
Right, and what the local angle is, right? Is there a local branch? Is there a local manager? Or is it just that we're now penetrating a new market and you should care?
Exactly.
Is it also, what are the differences in how you approach reporters?
Oh God, it's vastly different. So I have founded and run agencies in both the UK and the US. And one thing that I always found really, really interesting is that, you know, in the US, it's definitely more formal. I remember often I would be recruiting for new staff, and I found that from a PR perspective, a lot of times people were probably the best stalkers I've ever met in my entire life. They could tell me where a journalist has been for the past 15 years of their career, where have they freelanced, what have they written about, but often they haven't actually met the journalist in person. And it's just because the US is such a massive country. And, you know, there's publications where tests work from home, whether they're in New York, San Francisco, or the Midwest. And, you know, they might be a 3-hour drive from the closest city, in which case they're probably not going to be getting a lot of cups of coffee with a PR person.
Right.
Where you look at places like London and Edinburgh and Berlin, and it tends to be much smaller pockets of journalists and PRs. So it's far more common, you know, living in London, for me to call up a journalist and say, hey, do you want to go to the pub? Let's grab a drink. After work, just walk down the street, go to the pub. And if you get a bit too tipsy, you can take a taxi or you can take the tube home.
So when I first started doing agency PR in New York City, I did meet with reporters, you know, fairly regularly. I almost never, I wouldn't even think to ask that, and especially now, nobody's meeting anybody anywhere. But where I think the two places that I have met people in person used to be at like big conferences, right? Where you're all in the same place. Or I worked for you know, companies that were big and important enough where reporters would actually come to our office to interview our senior partners at PwC.
But I think you also find that in a work sense, you know, I'd say culturally, the US and the UK are very different in this as an example. So, you know, you go out socially with colleagues and you can get smashed in the UK. Yeah. And it's almost a badge of honor. It's like, we've survived getting drunk together. And then you show up the next day and you're a bit hungover. It's like, well, yeah, last night was really rough. Where, you know, when I was in the States, oh my God, you never show up to work with a hangover. That would be a lawsuit.
Yeah, you don't admit that, right?
So I think you've got those two cultures that are just so vastly different.
But I will say, I mean, in my father's day, like if you watched Mad Men, like half your job was drinking.
Yeah, I think those were the old days of the industry.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
The thing is, I'm very happy to talk to a journalist and be like, do you want cake and coffee? Because that's really my speed. Give me something sweet. Give me something with caffeine. I'm good.
Yeah, well, I understand that in general, UK PR professionals approach media a lot differently than the US. I think you're a lot more, generally speaking, and obviously I don't endorse this, but in the US I've heard that it's a lot more blanket pitching and aggression and bullying and sort of, stalking people. I think in the UK what I've understood to be true is that it's a lot more curated and relationship based and you're a lot more careful. Is that true, or can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I've seen both sides of the pond really, and I think part of it is it's cultural coming down from the clients as well. So, in the States you've got clients who say, we want to get top tier coverage. What have they said? What have they said? Have you contacted Wall Street Journal? What about Mashable? What about Cheddar? What have they said? What have they said? We need the response. So really the PR person is that poor middleman who's constantly like, I'm so sorry. Can you please just give me a yes or a no?
Like, please tell me no. Just please tell me no. That's all I need. Just a no.
There are points in the States when you're like, seriously, just tell me it's the fucking worst product you've ever seen.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
Tell the client that.
Right.
And there's just so much pressure in the States to get feedback when really nothing is needed.
No, I was just going to say, and they think that if the media tells them that it's the worst thing they've ever seen or it's not newsworthy, that you didn't do the appropriate job of pitching it. It's not that there's something wrong with their product. It's that, no, legitimately what you did isn't interesting.
And really, you don't want to be the brand that a journalist then tells all of their friends, like,
right.
You
end up on Twitter.
Man, the biggest news that they have.
But the problem is that it's the PR person who gets tweeted about, not the company.
Oh yeah, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Yeah. But I think it's a bit different. So in the UK, you're expected to have more of a relationship. And that's one thing that I've always told my teams, like, just make friends. You're going to be working with them for the next, 10, 15, 20 years. Go make friends. Find out what are they interested in? What do they like? What do they like personally? Because you're going to change jobs forevermore. I mean, for somebody to stay in one company for 20 years, I mean, that's so rare in PR. And it's the same in journalism.
Or in journalism, yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to be in Wall Street Journal for 25 years. They're going to move on to other things, and they're going to slowly build up their career the way anybody does.
So here's my thing, and maybe this is a personality issue with me, but I feel like trying to make friends with reporters is so obvious that you're trying to manipulate the situation.
I found that, here everyone's in the UK, people are we're all essentially in the same industry together. We're just on different sides of the fence. So it's, they know the frustrations that we have and we know the frustrations that they have.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a camaraderie, where in the States, it's almost an us versus them.
Yeah. Oh, it totally is.
And it's just a completely different dynamic. So you find that, when you are in the States and you are talking to a journalist and you're like, look, let's just meet as normal people. It feels weird for them. It's like, what do you want from me?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
I love it, but at the same time, like, who are you?
Yeah.
But I think it's just the culture of agencies as well.
Yeah.
In agencies in the States, it's, work. It's not a 9 to 5. It's, a 7 until 10 o'clock at night.
Wait, I have a good story, April. You're like this on that note. I had a guy say to me, PR isn't a 9 to 5 job, Laura. And I was standing in his office, somebody I worked for. And I looked at my watch and I said, well, seeing how it's 6 o'clock at night, I think I would agree with that statement. He was yelling at me for only working 9 to 5. And there I am in his office at 6 p.m.
So that's the thing that I find is insane. And then they're surprised that people burn out so quickly.
Right. That like the whole thing blows up in everybody's face. Right.
It's true. It's true. What are some of the other main differences that you see between different countries and how they do PR? And
the US loves to have, case studies and things that relate to the US. which I get. Again, it's a big country. If I had a case study that was from, I don't know, South Korea, would a US publication be interested in it? Probably not. They want something that relates locally, where if you're looking at more the European press, they're used to case studies that are, you know, outside of their own borders. So there's more wiggle room with that, which is always really nice.
Well, it's good to have the Financial Times based in London, basically.
I know. Yeah, and that's the thing, because they're just right down the street. The Guardian are right down the street as well. So it is a lot easier for us to be able to just call up a journalist and be like, oh, I'm going to be down the road. If you want to meet really quickly for 5 minutes. The pressure in the US within the newsroom is like, I can't get away from my desk.
Right, no way.
Just email it to me.
The other question I have for you in terms of like the Guardian and the Financial Times, are they interested in meeting with you about like smaller companies or startup companies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the story just has to be good. Mm-hmm. So for instance, there's one company that I work with, which is a consumer tech company, and you know, it's a simple consumer tech product. It's not a teleporter. It's, you know, not something that's coming out of Star Trek that's going to change the world. So it really does matter giving them a specific angle. You know, is this a good company because it's showing that one region within the EU is actually innovating faster than another region within the EU? Are we finding that, you know, any sort of angle like that is actually really beneficial? But then at the same time, that David versus Goliath story that I was talking about before, it works really well outside of the US. And if you're looking at TechCrunch, you know, the startup story was really cool. And then they'd raise $1 million, and then they'd raise 5 million, then they'd raise 30 million. Right. And now, you know, you could raise a couple of million. Yeah, everyone does that.
Right. If you don't have like 100 or plus million, they don't care anymore. I know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same as like the crowdfunding space. You know, somebody would have raised $1 million on crowdfunding. That was huge news. Well, then suddenly you had digital ad spend come into it, and people were raising 8, 10, 20 million. It's like, well, unless you're raising figures like that, we're not interested anymore.
I know, Heather, we've talked in the past about how the agency worlds in both the US and the UK, but especially in the US, I think, tend to be very dysfunctional and toxic. I'm curious if you can talk through how you see that being the case. And then, so I'm assuming that's why you started your own agency.
Yeah.
If you could talk a little bit about how it led you to do that and why, you know, what you're trying to do differently, basically.
Buckle up, kids.
Okay, let's hear it.
I think it is toxic. And it will be for a number of reasons. And it is on both sides of the fence. I mean, one of the big things that we do is we're quite picky on what we work on. And I think both of you would have seen it. You know, you've got new business that comes in and it's really good fees and it's a really good product, but the person you'd be dealing with seems a bit crazy. Whatever you're going to do, they're never going to be happy. And I've had, you know,
and they're never not going to be crazy, right?
Exactly. You know, I've had companies where I've got them on the cover of Wired, or you've got them in Time magazine, and you get really excited because you work so hard and you show it to them, and the answer is like, well, what's next?
Right.
It's like, literally whatever we do will never make you happy. So why are we bending over backwards for that? So I think there's that side. And a lot of agencies have this belief that they have to have these big swanky offices that have, like, you know, free beer on Thursdays and champagne on Fridays, and they've got a piano in the corner. And and often, you know, I hate to say it, but it tends to be male, stale and pale up at the top. And there's this belief that, you know, your company is only successful if you have lots of staff. And then it's just this spiral because they're not passionate about it anymore. And it's just a shame because you end up losing a bit of like your heart for the industry, and is this right for me, and my clients are never happy, and I don't like what I'm working on. And I think it's, you know, if you've got a happy team, then you'll have happy clients. And if you've got happy clients, you'll have a happy team. And it's like this really lovely little hippie circle that I love.
Yep.
But then also from the very top, because they'd lived in the years of PR, of, you know, party hard and do long hours, they assume everybody has to, whether they need to or not. Just do your job. If you've done it within that 9 to 5, then go home. If you're working at 10 o'clock at night, that tells me either you haven't done your work, in which case you're either really distracted, and we need to sort that out, or you've got too much on your plate, in which case, again, let's have a chat and sort it out and maybe divide it amongst other people. But it's not a healthy environment. It means you're going to burn out staff really quickly. You're then going to have to headhunt staff. You're then going to have to train up those staff. By the time they've trained them up, they're burnt, and then you have that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm adamant about people. I'm very bad about working over 40 hours. I usually work 60 to 80, and I can't help it. I'm trying always to scale back. But the more I scale back, the bigger we get, and then I have to go back to 80 hours, and but I try not to let anybody else do that, right? It's sort of like, I'm happy to let myself be abused in that way, and I'll do it to myself, but I'm not going to do that to anyone else.
But that's the thing, because, and it should be like that. When you're a business owner, it's your baby and you want it to succeed, and you suddenly feel like the mama hen, and all of the staff, whether they're full-time or part-time or consultants, like, these are your babies. You got to make sure that they, can pay the rent.
Happy, right?
And exactly, you want them to be happy so that they're doing a good job. Where the traditional agency model, it churns through people too, because it doesn't matter. They're just employee number 54.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like one of the things you do to make sure that this is very different from a lot of agencies, to make sure that clients are PR ready, is you actually get them there, right? Can you talk a little bit about how you actually brand clients and work on their packaging and do all of these things to make sure they're to a place where they're presentable to the press?
Yeah, so I started doing this for very selfish reasons, because as all of us have, you're given a product and you're told, like, PR this product, and it's awful. And you're just going to have to call journalists, be like, please love me. Please love this horrible product.
Yeah, don't blame me. I'm just the messenger.
Yeah, I have to send you this release. I am so sorry, but please just give me any feedback. And I think it's soul destroying to constantly be in that position. So I was finding that earlier and earlier stages, I was like, oh God, if you change the color to this one, it'll actually sell better. Or, oh, that packaging, there's a lot of spelling mistakes. And I think part of it is working with, companies that are based in Asia and Europe and various countries where English might be their second language. So, you look at their package, you're like, well, if a journalist saw that there were spelling mistakes, it doesn't look very professional. So why don't you just share the packaging with me early on, and I'll go through and I'll edit it. And I was finding that I was doing earlier stuff like that. And then to the point of saying, okay, well, I like the product, but it's been out for a while. So why don't we make a new version of it? Why don't we change the material that it's made of? Why don't we, do something a bit different? And then it's a creative campaign. And if it's successful, well, then you can roll it out as a real product. Mm-hmm. If it's not successful, it's just a PR stunt. Who cares? And actually, that was how I started getting into it more and more.
Did you just learn to do this on your own, or did you end up bringing in like a branding expert or a packaging design expert, or how, what does that look like?
No, I think it was just over years of kind of learning, and I think I'm a naturally curious person. So it ended up it was fun. I like the product development side of it anyway. You could study it, but I didn't study it. So yeah.
But you did study it. You just studied it in the real world instead of
okay. You didn't get an industrial design or engineering degree, but
yeah, which I think is great. I mean, I don't think people need to have a degree to come into the industry. I think they just have to have a passion.
I completely agree with that.
And it's often people, if they study PR, they suddenly go into the real world, and what they studied and the reality are very different things.
Right.
The writing style is very different. So it's much better to have people of different backgrounds, and they went to university, or they didn't go to university, or they studied psychology, or they studied mathematics, whatever, because it means that they're pulling in new ideas and new concepts. So when you are creating these new products or new campaigns, they will have their own bits of information that'll feed in. Mm-hmm. And every single one of these campaigns is a case study. you can look back on it and be like, right, so if I use PLA plastic, there's these paints that I can't use because it won't stick, it'll just peel off.
Interesting.
So,
Or like it'd be cost prohibitive to try to, like, too expensive to make it, so then you have to put it at a higher price point for consumers, and then nobody's going to buy it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was finding that, you know, even from a product development side, looking at the factories, you know, the clients would say, oh, well, we don't know how to price it. Should it be 150 or 170? And I was just, again, naturally curious and saying, ooh, so why are we looking at those prices? So how much does it actually cost to make? What's the chip? How much does the chip cost? Okay, so what about the mold? Ooh, molds are really expensive. So
That's fascinating. Heather, what's the hardest part of having your own agency?
the hours that you work are crazy, but it doesn't feel as bad when it's yours and you're doing the crazy hours because you know it's moving in the right direction, and it's to make sure that the clients are happy and your team are happy. So I think the long hours is definitely it, but any business owner would say that.
Right.
I think the other side is just the paperwork. But I think the thing that every agency kind of needs, every owner, is kind of just an AA meeting of other owners. I think there's always just so much competition, and part of it does come down to the culture of previous MDs and founders, you know, that male stay on tail, very competitive, like we're going to steal their clients, and we're all in this together. You know, at the beginning of the journey, you don't know if you're doing it right. And, you know, is my HR system correct? Do I have the right handbook? Do I have enough information in the handbook? What about my insurance? Is it the right insurance? And I think often people just need a bit of a, you know, an AA meeting, just a couple of other founders that like,
I
yeah,
could use that.
hiring is really difficult. Oh God, taxes are difficult. Why don't you talk to this person?
Right. No, we should start that, because there are even things where you start to feel crazy, like, am I a bad person that I'm always slacking email while I'm at every single meeting? But if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be able to do my job.
Because you just can't disconnect. You're always there, and clients
always
are
at
always
work.
awake.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do we stop it? I feel like it does need to be, the brakes need to be put on it in some way, shape, or form.
You know, I do explain, like, look, if the world is burning, we will work on a weekend. But there's one really important point that I always tell them, and it sounds ridiculous, so you're going to have to bear with me. But they're not allowed to send emails that say urgent or emergency or important in bold. Like that's absolutely banned. And the reason is because it gives you like heart palpitations. You sit there and you see urgent, you're like, fuck, what's happened? And usually it's not urgent. It's like,
You could be driving off the road.
yeah, you're like, oh, can you send that email in 4 days' time? It's like, what the,
Right.
why did you do that to me?
Right.
So for us, we always tell clients at the very beginning, like there's two things. There's cake and there's cupcake. If it's an urgent, if it needs attention right now, put cake in the subject. People love cake. It's you know, because I love cake, subconsciously, it's the first thing I'll see in a, you know, a string of random emails. Like obviously my eyes are going to gravitate towards the cake. You're not going to get that panic attack. And it makes them actually think whether this is an emergency or not.
That's so funny.
I love
if it's
that.
something that doesn't have to be responded to now, it can be done in the morning. Cupcake. And it's amazing. I think we've had those emails go down by like 98% because most of the time it's not an emergency.
It can wait till Monday, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
I love it. Ice cream and pizza.
Yeah. It's just
That would be mine.
How do you have any tips for if you have taken on clients where you feel like you didn't get the full story up front? How do you handle getting it after the fact without making them think that you don't understand their business?
I think there was one not too long ago where I didn't get the true story, found out the true story, so I fired them.
Wow, you did.
Yeah. When you started off, I think it's good to do a bit of role play and say, all right, I'm going to pretend to be a journalist. My name is Hannah. So I'm going to ask you tough questions. I'm going to ask you soft questions, but I want you to pretend that this is real. And that is, you know, the one chance that you have to really go through everything that you want to. And at the same time, kind of poke them and prod them a little bit and be like, this isn't going to be easy. And, you know, secretly, if there's things that you are afraid to ask, well, like, now's the time to do it. Because I'm Hannah the journalist, and that's what Hannah would ask. So
that is super smart. I'm going to start using that too.
Trick them into giving you the information that they would be hesitant, or you would feel awkward asking otherwise.
I love that. I'm so glad I asked you that. What are you looking for in a client? What if we have listeners who are owners of US brands and they want UK press? What would you want to take on as an agency?
I think
since you are picky.
Things that are interesting. So the way that we work is companies tend to approach us, and then I'll present it to the team and find out who likes it, who gets it, who has experienced that area. If none of us like it, if none of us understand it, it means we're not going to be able to pitch it to journalists. And I come from California, so I am a California hippie at heart. And I want to totally drink the Kool-Aid with every client I work on. I want to sit there and be like, it's a Bluetooth tracker and it's the best one on the market. So for me, it's companies that are actually just doing things that are interesting.
Good for you.
Yeah.
And do you have any last words of wisdom for the young listeners who are either new to PR or are still finding their way within the industry?
If people are looking to go into the industry, it's worth contacting MDs and, you know, heads of companies and just being honest and saying, look, I'm interested in your company. I'd love to take you out for a coffee, or I'd love to pay for a Deliveroo coffee that comes to where you are, and we'll do a video Skype because I want to find out more about your agency and if it's a good fit for me. Because that would go miles instead of just being, you know, pushed into an HR pile of CVs and resumes.
Or kilometers.
Yeah, exactly. Oh. I'm not that European yet. Yeah.
Well, we would love to see you in person. In the meantime, let's definitely get serious about putting together this group. We'll do a PR agency support network or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's set it up. We'll get it going.
Sounds good.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Heather.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good rest of your night. Sweet dreams.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
We have a thing to read, right?
PR news of the week. So Laura.
Yes.
Orbit Gum.
Yes.
Is seeking ways to help millennials successfully date through COVID-19, and is offering a parent babysitting pack for those who live at home and could use the help. So the ad is saying, keeping your parents busy so you can get busy, ... date.
Oh, like these are for like young people who live at home and are trying to, date virtually?
Yeah.
And like can't, get their freak on because mom and dad are upstairs or in the next room?
Yeah, which I'm guessing means sexting or video sexing, or I think
that's called pornography in my era, but go on.
Okay, so the full Orbit Parent Sitter Pack has something for every type of parent, which includes an online cooking class for parents who love to keep their hands and stomachs full, a plant delivery service for parents who need to take care of something other than their grown child, and a subscription to a TV streaming service because parents also need to binge watch and chill. So it says you can tweet at Orbit Gum and tell the social media team why you need #Orbit Parent Sitter. Include the sweepstakes hashtag too for a chance to win. So I really admire the creativity that goes into it. I have to say, when I first read it, I did not see a straight line from Orbit Gum to, Orbit Parent Sitter Pack. But the fact that they're going out there on a limb and making it that crazy, I think is both a little bit desperate and also just incredibly impressive.
It's a little bit of both.
It's a little bit of both. Also, that this is not the first time they've done something this crazy, so maybe they are trying to build a brand that's a bit of a...
Well, their ads were a little bit offbeat, years ago.
Right.
Right, with the British woman.
There's another campaign moment from Orbit where Orbit Gum matches with Tinder on chatbot to keep dating clean. So they did some other kind of long walk. It was dating in 2020 has become the wild, wild west, and people think anything goes. That's why under Orbit Gum's latest Keep It Clean campaign, the brand is giving fans advice on how to clean up their dating game on its newest OLV ad spot launching today. So anyway, it's a bit of a weird one. They've also got another one they did where it was Orbit Gum gets surprisingly earnest and aspirational time to shine ads by BBDO. So they definitely have a history of doing, under that one, it was Wrigley's Extra was ad banned for being irresponsibly placed and sexually suggestive. So they did this thing to.
So how is this connected to gum, though? Is it because if you're chewing gum, your breath smells better?
I guess the idea is gum is something that you would want before you go on a date.
Right.
So that your breath
But if you're
smells
a video
better.
date, it doesn't matter.
COVID has basically changed everyone's target market and audience, and
Right.
if you're a consumer brand, everything's been turned upside down.
Yeah.
So what people might have done before, they're not doing anymore, and people that wouldn't have been your target audience anymore now might be. Everything is shifted.
Okay.
And so it's almost like you have to start at the beginning.
Right.
And I think this is actually, I didn't even think this through before just now, but it is, to your point, kind of an example of a brand not doing that. Who gives a shit if your breath smells good and you're dating online? It doesn't make any sense. They might need to reconfigure that because it's not a selling point at this moment in time.
Maybe they need to hire us.
Okay, Orbit Gum, please hire us for PR. Thanks.
Or maybe we were saying, you're home with your animals. Maybe they need to come up with some funny thing, or maybe it's real, where there's gum for cats and dogs, and show cats chewing gum and or dogs chewing, blowing bubbles, and so their breath is better because you're cooped up with your animals, and everybody needs to smell better inside. And it's just, we make a better at home experience for everyone during this time.
I want to know if they got media coverage for this campaign. I'm going to look real quick.
Yeah, well, that's what I was asking.
Because I saw
did this work PR-wise?
Well, got in the PR trade. So they got in Marketing Dive. That doesn't surprise me. PR Daily. The fact they got in Travel and Leisure is interesting.
No, but it makes it easier to get at least the coverage that they got by being part of Mars,
Yes.
So imagine if you were just some small startup company. And who knows if they used their agency or not, or what they did. You don't know how much they hammered on it either.
Yeah,
but, companies like that, they have beat reporters, who cover them for a living, or, the trade publications will print almost anything that they send to them. But I feel like a small company with a scrappy PR agency could probably have gotten more media coverage for that than they did. And I will say that.
Yeah, I agree with that. At the very minimum, they could have done more with influencers or bloggers or some,
funny video thing or something.
I think so. I think it could have gone further.
Well,
should we hear our horror story of the week?
All right. Neither of us have seen this yet because it's anonymous, and we wait for the big reveal.
My subject, I know my email subject is "Do not read until podcast" in all caps.
And we listen to that because we want to be as amazed as our audience when we hear it.
Okay, here we go. I once worked at an agency under a senior manager who was particularly intense. It was a given that if any of her team members sent out materials to a client or colleague, anything from a full byline to a brief email, they could expect a list of, quote, mistakes to arrive in their inbox shortly afterwards. That went well beyond healthy constructive criticism. Even her compliments were often followed by a snide mention of a past mistake. The agency touted constant feedback as a part of the culture there, but that feedback would often cross into questioning a person's, quote, worthiness, even over small administrative errors.
Right.
So even over small administrative errors, people are getting questioned on their worthiness of being part of the team. Okay. This supervisor had particular preferences for around the office that we learned to adhere to in order to avoid the inevitable bad email, in all caps, which ranged from how we should clean the office coffee filter to entering her office to personally say good morning and goodbye every day, to more typical spelling or grammar errors.
I said I want to kill myself already over this. I have to stand up. Go on.
Are you serious?
Oh, it's just like flash PTSD. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So one day I came into work to find a meeting request in my inbox with a note from the supervisor that it was, quote, time for a friendly check-in. Oh, I had recently been promoted and assumed it was a casual touch base. I was not correct. I entered the meeting, which began with her asking how I was doing, then took a hard left turn into her asking if I, quote, really thought I could keep up in my new role. I tried to be polite in fielding her barrage of questions about my workability, though I couldn't remember a time I'd failed to complete a task or made some egregious error. Nevertheless, I smiled and thanked her for her feedback. Eventually, she stopped me. Her final critique was that I simply, quote, smiled and laughed far too often.
Oh my God, this is so great. I'm telling you, I have a whole thing. Okay.
Okay, we have one more
Paragraph here.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, at that point, I realized there was no use in trying to please her and that my anxiety was not very sustainable. I soon began sending out applications elsewhere, and funny enough, every manager I've had since then has always complimented my pleasant attitude. Oh, I like the ending. The rest of
It's
sucks.
awesome, right? There were so many things in here that were similar issues that I have faced in multiple different jobs. So the good news is that you're not alone.
Yes.
Because the themes in this email hit on so many things that happen to so many of us. And the fact that it all happened to this one person with one manager it's unbelievable. There's so many things.
Do you think this was a scenario where the supervisor just simply couldn't get the junior person under their thumb in a satisfactory way? And this was just a bullying tactic to get this person to fall into line and be as miserable as they were?
I feel like it comes back to one of the things that we talk about on many podcasts, that somebody decided that this employee should be on their way out. So it is bullying and harassing to try to get that person to leave. I think that, again, and as soon as this kind of nonsense starts happening to you, like, the writing's on the wall. And like,
right, and it makes me wonder, right, did this person in some other way offend the supervisor based on they don't want to do something for ethical reasons and this person took offense to it? Or is there something, like, it just makes you wonder if there was some other, it feels so out of the blue.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it did.
Especially because they just got promoted. So
right.
why would somebody try to be getting rid of me? Why'd have gotten promoted if I was such a bad employee? It doesn't matter. Because you do not know what might have happened the week after you got promoted internally, some internal politics thing. And they're like, get rid of Susie. Like, but wait, Susie just got promoted. Like, I don't care because of X, Y. And you will never know why, because there's crazy politics in companies. And it has nothing to do with you, really. Like, nothing has anything to do with you. You just need to, like, keep it moving for yourself. And I say this every time, but I've seen this kind of thing happen to me and to others. I mean, what was the other part of it? Crossing over to your worthiness, right? Like, percent versus percent. Like, you're a bad employee. You're really not very good at your job. Like, oh my God. It's mental abuse. And there's the kind of thing that you can't prove and you can't sue, and it's just, tough luck, wrong place, wrong time. And it happens all the time. The other thing that I see here that really got me was when, they're being forced to go in and personally say good morning and goodbye. It's because she's keeping, or I'm assuming it's a she, it could be a he. I forget if it was keeping tabs on like your whereabouts. And it's just like, oh, like what, you don't trust that I'm coming to work on time?
Oh, wait, is that what it was meaning? Not just like when you came in, that's what you were supposed to say? I took it as that was the thing you were supposed to say is like, this is the way you enter my office or leave it.
Oh, I have a feeling like it's like you have to come in and say this and leave and say this because I'm clocking you in and out. I'm keeping tabs on your time and when you get here and when you leave.
I did have somebody that used to actually go, there was key cards for when you scan to get into the building.
Right.
And this person would go and take track. And so I used to do this thing where when I realized that this was actually something that was happening and looked at, I would make sure that I came to work even if I hadn't finished my makeup and, you know, scan it in by a certain time. I need to go finish my makeup in the bathroom or go get my breakfast after that, because it was ridiculous because it's just because I knew it was all about appearances. I thought, okay, well, if it's about appearances, then I might as well.
Then I'll play the game. And then on the other side, like, you know, office hours aren't 9 to 5. Well, okay, it's 6:00 p.m. and I'm standing here. So why are you telling me that? Obviously I'm not a clock puncher. It drives me crazy.
No, I really prefer virtual offices for that reason.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I also tell people, you know, I even just had this conversation last week interviewing someone. It was like, I don't care what hours you work, as long as you're there for all the client calls.
Right.
You're responsive to the team on email and Slack.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you get your stuff done.
Right. And there are some, you know, like if a press release is going out at, you know, 9 o'clock, you have to be involved at 9 o'clock. You know, there's certain things that are tied
of
to
course.
o'clock.
Like,
right.
But at the same time.
But this whole like checking in and checking out, I mean,
Yeah, this one really got you.
You know, it did. And questioning, are you really up to the job? Oh, like what a like passive aggressive nonsense is that? Like, tell me if I'm not up to the job. Don't ask me what? Especially if you're young and you're just like, I thought I was up. What? Like, what are you talking about? Like, tell me something specific. But again, it's mental abuse and they're doing it to you to make you question yourself, and they're trying to get you to quit.
I mean, there is a place where as a supervisor, you may have to ask somebody if they're really not performing to the level that you think they're at. I think those are fair conversations to have, but that should be done from a place of caring and wanting that person to succeed. And as long as you're doing it that way, that's a different story. But if you're coming at them and it's that passive aggressive tone you're talking about,
and it's because it's not true. It has nothing to do with this person's performance at all. On when they showed up, how they wrote, it has not. Something else happened, and they're going to try to pin it on that person so that they quit, and then they don't have to fire them. And so I think it's probably a PR has maybe a preponderance of this, but it's agency, and beyond that, it's probably a lot of industries. It's hard to get a job. It takes a lot of time. And I was always like, I'm doing my job. I'm not leaving.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Okay, we've been on the phone for like 8 days, so let's do it.
Thank you for tuning in for the PR Wind Down podcast.
And thanks so much to Heather for joining us today for that fantastic interview.
Remember to submit your own agency stories and questions. If you like what we're doing, please like, rate, and share our show with your PR inner circle.
We cannot wait to wind down with you again next week.
Have a good week.